Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. Alright everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I'm your host as usual, and obviously welcome back to the show. Today's episode 247 of the show, and before we get started, we're just going to do a little bit of house cleaning quick around here, because, well, it only makes sense that we do it, so let's just get on with the house cleaning. I do want to say thank you guys for coming back and listening. It does mean a lot to me. You guys constantly take time in your days to download these episodes, to share these episodes, to constantly keep letting me know how you feel, whether you like my stupid face or not. At the end of the day, it's greatly appreciated, and I greatly appreciate you. Also, thank you to the Patreon backers as well for supporting the show. You all are greatly appreciated as well. But today's episode really coincides with, well, primarily with Apple, but primarily with the new releases. But we do want to focus on, well, technically it's two of them. In total, it's 3 releases, but in total, we only want to focus on 2 of them, even though it really should be 1, because essentially we're talking about the new M2 Max. And the other product was the HomePod, and we will be talking about that fairly shortly since, well, that sucker specifically is going to come out the 3rd of February. So we'll talk about that probably next week's episode for sure. But the people voted that they wanted to talk about the new M2 Max, primarily the new Mac Mini, which has the M2 chip, and the new M2 Pro, and then the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros with M2 Pro and M2 Max. Now, let me preference this while saying this now. If you have a 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro from last year, or when the M1 Pro and the M1 Max models came out, should you upgrade? No, you really shouldn't. Let's be real here, guys. Those machines are clearly more than capable, and they will be more than capable for the next, 5 to 6, 7 years. Let's be honest here. Those suckers are going to age like fine wine. I don't see the performance on those things really not being able to chug through video. Like, let's be real, guys, it's going to be able to chug through pretty easily. But if we want to talk about the new MacBook Pros, let's start with the Pros. I'd say let's start with the new MacBooks in general, because, the Mini is the one that I'm the most excited for. When you look at starting prices for, the 14-inch and the new 16-inch, pretty much they fall in line with last year's models in terms of price range. Primarily the 14-inch will start with the 10-core CPU and 16-core GPU, 16 gigs of RAM, 512, start at $2,000. Then if you want to get the higher version of the M2 Pro with 12 cores, CPU and 19 on the GPU, 16 gigs of RAM, terabyte of storage, that's about like $2,500. And then obviously the starting version of the M2 Max with the 12-core CPU, 30-core GPU, 32 gigs of RAM, terabyte of storage is like $3,100. The main difference that we run into is primarily with the new CPU and also with the new highest RAM configuration, which with the CPU on the M2 Max, it was up to 12 cores on the CPU, 38 on the GPU, but the new RAM configuration goes up to 96 gigabytes of storage, or 96 gigabytes of RAM. The storage still goes up to 8 terabytes as before. So it's like, if you really need the memory, like if you need the full 96 gigs of RAM, then Gucci, go for it, but yeah, like if you already have a 64 gigabyte model of the M1 Max, or even basically of the M1 Max, then it's kind of pointless. But hey, man, it's your money. You're allowed to do whatever you want. At the end of the day, these machines are practically identical to, the ones from before. They look exactly the same keyboard, same ports, same power draw. Like, let's be real. Granted, they're saying you can get better battery life out of these suckers, but I don't know. But this is where it starts to get interesting when we talk about the Mac Mini. For me, the Mac Mini with the new M2 chip and all the fact that they even gave it an M2 Pro overall is an incredible value, if I'm being honest with you. I think personally, for a lot of people that want to get into the Mac ecosystem or want to experience it, like prime example, say someone like me that, wants to try using a Mac, even though I've used Macs before, but I don't own a Mac. I would say the Mac Mini would be the best bet to go due to the fact of the entry price, the performance that you're getting at this price. So let's see. We have the base model of the M2 with the 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage at $599. That's really good. The fact that they also updated the ports too, and you can also get gigabyte Ethernet on them as 10 gigabyte Ethernet specifically on them, which I think that's really good. The fact that they updated the HDMI port, so now it's 2.1, great. That's awesome. And then obviously you go up to a more beefed up version of the M2 chip with the full, primarily with more storage and more RAM. But this is where it gets crazy, is the fact that they gave it the M2 Pro, which hasn't happened before. So the Mac Mini now gets an M2 Pro, and it gets both versions. You can either get a 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU version, or you can get the 12-core CPU, 19-core GPU. And prime example, if you wanted to go with the configuration of, the max version of the M2 Pro with the full 32 gigs of RAM and say maybe a 512 gigabyte, SSD on it, or I'd say 512 gigabyte, and you want the gigabyte Ethernet, that's about $2,100. And some people said, well, what's the point of buying that? Because at that point, you're already going into Mac Studio pricing territory. Because once you start configuring the Mac Mini, say up to that $2,000 range, some people are like, well, you kind of go down a rabbit hole, because at that point, people are like, well, you should just buy an entry level, Mac Studio, because you're getting a better machine for the same price, which, yeah, I see that. And I think that's very, I'm going to be honest with you guys. They make good points. Let's be real here. You look at the Mac Studio starting at $1,900. You get the M1 Max with the 10-core CPU, 24-core GPU with 32 gigs of RAM, 512 gigabytes of storage is $2,000 even. So it's obviously the Mac Studio can go a lot crazier. Let's just be transparent here, guys. It can definitely go crazy. And they make good points. But I think when you focus on people that just want a Mac to try it out, or at least have a portable machine, which that's the whole point of the Mac Mini, is that it is a Mac that you can take with you. So if you already have your own keyboard and stuff, prime example, if you're a Windows user and you already have your own peripherals and everything, you literally can just use your stuff that you already have. You don't need to buy a specific keyboard for the Mac. Prime example, I have a Keychron K8 Pro. This keyboard works for both Mac and Windows. So you just flip a switch and it goes to either one. You can swap at the keycap, so hey, I'm using it for my Mac. Granted, I'm not going to do that, but I'm look, I know where everything is. It's the same thing. It's just swap a Windows key for Command. I'm not doing that, homie. That's kind of stupid. But I think for the performance that you're getting at this entry-level price, granted, I personally believe that if you are going to buy the Mac Mini with the M2 specifically, and you don't want to go for the M2 Pro, because I feel like if you go for the M2 Pro, when you start configuring it up, at that point, you should, you realistically should just go for the Mac Studio at that point, to be honest with you. You spend a little bit more, but you get more out of it. You know what I'm saying? It just makes the most sense. You genuinely just get more out of it the second you go for the M2 Pro and you start configuring it up and things like that. But with, say, the 512 gigabyte, let's say that. Let's go in this direction. You go with a Mac Mini, regular M2. Say you get 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigabyte storage, and if you even want the 10 gigabit Ethernet, if you don't need it, then hey, you don't need it. Let's be honest here. That's $1,000 even. And if you already have monitors that you want to use, you already have your peripherals, that's $1,000 even. Because some people have made the debate where it's yeah, I can spend the money, but then I have to buy monitors and things like that. And I'm well, if you already have that, then there's no point in buying a MacBook. You get what I'm saying? Because some people obviously, here's the funny thing with people that buy MacBooks too. I've noticed is some people buy MacBooks just to use them stationary. Bro, what's the point? Take it, that's the point. You get what I'm saying? They're meant to be portable machines. it's just kind of weird. At that point, just buy like a Mac Mini, just keep it at the house. Like for me, if I were to buy a Mac Mini, like I'd probably do the M2 with the full 24 gigs of RAM, the 512 gigabyte storage, and I just get the 10 gigabyte Ethernet just to have it in case I ever want it. And if you have a student discount, it's $100 off. So, without the student discount, it's $1,300. With it is like $1,200. Obviously, this is obviously before taxes. Like if I wanted to go crazy and I just wanted like a Mac that for editing and things like that, like I probably would buy the Studio. Like if I were to buy the Studio personally, like this is me, I would do the M1 Max. I'd probably just max out the M1 Max just cause. I'd be fine with the 32 gigs of RAM because, well, that's all I like, to be honest. That's all you really need because you're never really going to hit that memory buffer because you really won't, bud. Like you can get the 64 if you want it, but you really won't do it. And I'd probably just stick with a 512 gigabyte SSD because I have my own external SSDs. And that's $2,119 because at that point, if I were to fully configure an M2 Pro, so same configuration, the max out GPU, CPU, 32 gigs of RAM, 512, and with the 10 gigabyte Ethernet, it's at that point, it's $100 cheaper, but it's like, yeah, you get what I'm saying? Like at that point, you might as well just get the Mac Studio at that point, to be honest with you guys. But I think for a lot of people, especially if you're also a student and you want to take advantage of the student discounts, yeah, I think the Mac Mini with the M2 like is a good bargain. Now, granted, I think you should bump the SSD because it has been revealed that the 256 gigabyte SSD is slower than the 512. So it's recommended that, hey, you really should just bump up to the 512. And, if you have your own external SSDs and stuff like that, just use them. But I do think for a lot of people, the entry level price is good. I think if you want a solid machine that you can just have in the house, like you could just do the Mac Mini with the M2, do 16 gigs of RAM. I don't think you should do 8 because I don't think 8 is good enough anymore. Objectively speaking, like I feel like at this point, hey, 8 gigabytes of RAM should not be a standard. I think 16 should be the normal standard, no matter on the machine, no matter the architecture and things like that. Having more RAM, or at least above 16 and above, should be recommended for long-term sustainability. So if you went down the rabbit hole and you said Mac Mini, M2, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigabyte SSD, regular gigabyte Ethernet, that's $1,000. Student discount, it'd be $899. If you wanted the full 24 gigabytes, then go for it. I personally don't think you should go for the storage expansions because I think those are ripoffs. You should just buy your own external SSD. If you want the 10 gigabyte Ethernet, if you already have the luxury of faster, gigabit speeds, then yeah, I would say take advantage of it and things like that, especially like if you're running a NAS server and things like that runs on 10 gigabyte Ethernet and things like that, then yeah, I think it makes logical sense to do that. But at the end of the day, I'm more excited for the Mac Mini. I'm excited to see the performance when we actually get to see like, okay, the numbers and everything like that, to see how the sucker performs, if there's any issues with like displays and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I'm genuinely excited. And, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you guys genuinely care? Do you guys not care? Like, if you were to pick up a Mac, which one would you buy? Would you personally buy one of the new MacBook Pros, the 14-inch, 16-inch, or would you prefer going for the Mac Mini this time around? For me, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I'm probably going to buy my first Mac this summer after my internship. Or either that or starting off my career. That'll probably be one of my big purchases that I start off with, is just buying my Mac. And, I got to think about a lot of stuff with it because I already have everything I need. So I already got monitors, I got keyboard, I got mouse. Like, I already got everything. So it's just buy the dang thing. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And next week we will be talking about the HomePod, because to me, especially after last week's episode where we talk about the Sony Walkman and things like that, and I mentioned things about the iPod, I think it's interesting that the HomePod is now coming back, and I have a lot of thoughts for that. But I do want to say thank you guys for coming back and listening. It does mean a lot to me, guys, that you guys are, well, you guys obviously like the show, because if you didn't, you wouldn't download these episodes, you wouldn't be sharing them, you probably wouldn't even care about coming back and listening. I'm going to be honest with you. I also do want to say today, or at least the day that this episode goes live, so on the 27th, the 28th is my birthday. So this weekend, you're probably going to be seeing a lot of photos and stuff like that from me posting about my birthday, because I'm genuinely excited. It's going to be really fun. So keep me in your thoughts and prayers, because I get to drive home, and that's going to be a fun time driving back because I get to bring my little puppy dog with me. But thank you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful week and weekend. Please be safe, y'all. Don't do anything dumb. And I will see you guys next week. Bye, guys. Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.